To do what was necessary required that Thorn bind himself to the demon in much the same way that Anakari had bound herself to him. In the process, while his sorceress abilities expanded exponentially, his hold on them became increasingly tenuous. Anytime his concentration shifted slightly from the task at hand, his perspective shattered, and scenes from all over the palace pierced him, seemingly at random. He was swept helplessly to the top of Alora's eyrie. At precisely the stroke of midnight on the last night of Alora's 12th year, the Vizards come for her. They are her keepers, charged on peril of life and soul across the 12 domains with her protection. One representative from each realm, rotated each year, so that on this special day there will be 12 sets of 12 to stand by her. He was swept helplessly to the apartments of the Princess Anakari. She stands on the wraparound balcony of her rooms and stares up at Alora's eyrie. "It's an honor," he hears the king say, and realizes that both voice and scene are part of Anakari's memory. A mask lies between father and daughter on a silken pillow. It is a thing of beauty, a human face interpreted by the finest artisans of the Vale folk. "I don't want it. I am a princess." "I don't ask you to understand, Anakari, nor approve. I do require your obedience." She will wear the mask and attend Alora as Vizard for her allotted month. Instead, she flees. The images of Anakari lasted until she passed beyond the palace walls. They were the limits of the demon's range. The scene again shifted. Alora isn't in her room. And in that moment, Thorn was gripped by the wild fear that she had fled her fate as well. But the Vizards don't need much of a search to find her. She isn't trying to hide. She has simply exchanged bed for garden and nestled herself in the crook of an oak branch. Thorn couldn't help a smile at the sight. He hears the sound of wings manifesting in the form of a human child, standing in the door of a private sitting room. Boy or girl, it is hard to tell. "You are not what we expected, Kirin Dinir," says a voice. Consort to a Vale lord, the woman, like all her race, is very tall. "Be glad I've come at all. Do not be impertinent to me. I am Queen Magister of the realms beyond. I stand second among the assembly to Sherlindria herself, and I am as my brethren would have our hosts see us, complete with Daikini name to match their features. You are but a single aspect of the Vale folk. We are of earth and air and fire and water. We come to this assembly in friendship. You are too trusting. Your power has made you arrogant. Perhaps, but none of us shall break the peace we all swore upon Alora Dannon's birth. What will happen when the Daikini have that accursed brat to stand as their champion? According to prophecy, Alora Dannon is to stand champion for us all. The cataclysm manifested itself in every domain. Only Alora Dannon survived. Whatever struck at her, lady, is a power to be reckoned with." "They're afraid," Thorn whispered, and the sound of his own voice broke the cord that linked him to the Vale Queen's apartment. From every turret of the palace, a trumpet voluntary burst forth, reaching out across city and bay. Sunrise. Where had the night gone?
"You wander."
There was accusation in the demon's voice. "I know, I'm sorry." The figure of the woman still floated before him. Thorn reached out to the woman's forehead and found the flesh cooled at the touch. He touched fingertips to his own brow, then lips, lastly heart. He ran a line from her forehead to her lips, her heart, and beyond, marking all the crucial access points of power in her body. He blew a puff of air into her mouth. He drew a breath as deep as he could manage, and felt her chest expand to follow.
"The form lives. It breathes."
"I live, demon, I breathe. She lives because I sustain her. What of the Magus? What of Alora Dannon?" Elora stands now in her room, having been wrapped so tightly in layers of ceremonial clothes that she can't even sit. She wonders if the Vizards will have to carry her to her altar. It was as though Thorn's eyes had turned to prisms, each the window on a different scene. Anna Carey crosses to the stables with leonine strides. The lions are to ride today in full ceremonial regalia. Anna Carey has defied her father again, exclaiming, "I am Colonel Commander of the Red Lions. My place is with my troops." "Jalabi," she calls now to her adjutant. "Dread Lady," he calls back. "Don't call me that. I've told you 1,000 times. Highness will do." It's an old joke between them. "I want a change in regimental orders for today." "Lady?" "I want them riding with war lances and shields." "Not very trusting by nature, are you?" Modri's voice brings a surprisingly shy smile to Anna Carey's lips. "No more than you would be, Modri, in similar circumstances." "This is a day of celebration, Princess, yet I note you've confined my personal escort to barracks, with a full troop of your own to mind them. My dear Anna Carey, I hardly think you've anything to fear from a score of them." "I've seen them fight." "And fought beside them." He takes her hand gently in his. "You should have stayed. You are one of us." "These are my people. This is my home." "You left once." "And came back." They cross the Ares shadow, and the castellan stops, his head cocked. "Impossible. The prisoner." "What of him?" "I had this sense of being watched." "He knows," Thorn said.
All the more reason, little Magus, for you to focus on the task at hand.
A pain lanced up from deep within, as if some power had snapped him in two. He saw the thread of his soul. As he watched, a darker strand reached out to embrace it. In desperation, his spirit form lunged forward to grab his soul and hold it fast. It shattered. He howled. The second pain was greater than the first. The third spasm broke his consciousness. He knew there'd be another spasm, and another. It would go on, until the demon's child was delivered, or he ceased to be. Time passed. He lost all sense of it, until, at long last, he drew back to himself a sense of self. "I am," followed by, "I am Thorn Drumheller." Shard by shard he found himself. Then he felt another vibration trickle through the fabric of the stones. New enchantments casting resonances off powers long dormant, as they had not been for longer than the memory of man. "Fools!" he cried within his thoughts. "Fools! What are you doing up there in the great hall?" He heard a final fanfare. It was precisely the moment of sunset. Thorn feels the doors of Alora's great hall thrown open. The space is alight with a multitude of candles. Interlaced around the chamber's circumference are the great seals of the domains, with Alora's own as the centerpiece. Between each set of seals is a section of seats for that domain. The vizards enter first, with solemn, stately tread. Next come the rulers of the domains, sovereigns of the primal elements, earth and air and fire and water, and of the primal mysteries. Some appear human, because that is their true nature. Others do so out of courtesy. A few make not the slightest pretense. 2 sections remain empty at the head of the room. Then, to all appearances, the candle flames begin to dance. Tiny spots of light and color form ever more intricate patterns with the streamers left in their wake. All eyes turn toward the doorway. The fairies average the size of a human finger. Their queen dwarfs them, though she stands smaller than a Daikini child. Sherlindria's hair is gossamer gold, so pale it nearly matches the silver of her gown. Her wings are scarcely thicker than its diaphanous fabric. Seeming to float, she makes her way along the aisle, Angwin's king proudly, handsomely by her side. Her companions form behind her, creating the illusion of a vast, glittering train. It is a breathtaking display. When she takes her seat, it shatters, all its fairy parts spinning off like plasma from a newborn star. When the room quiets, and eyes grow once more accustomed to the less dramatic illumination of the candle glow, Thorn beholds Willow Ufgood standing in the doorway. Through the demon's eyes, Thorn beheld the most magnificent lie. The figure is tall, in a way Willow has never been, and handsome, in a way Willow never dreamed of being. In the main, the features are his, but they've been polished to push him more toward what the Daikini would consider craggy good looks. Gold thread is worked through the fabric of his garments, catching the light with every movement. As Willow's stride eats up the distance from entrance to altar, Thorn has an absurd vision of dust motes scrambling to get out of his way. Thorn can't watch, can't bear to, and yet cannot tear his eyes away. This false Willow is too splendid a glory for any living being, mortal or otherwise, to resist. Were he himself, he would be lost. Fortunately, the demon discerns the patterns. It is the simplest kind of glamour, used by touring conjurers to place their audience in a more receptive mood, and easily deflected by any sorcerer worth the name. Yet the web being woven here is such a masterpiece of deception that simply to behold this deceiver, Thorn decides in that instant that deceiver is the name he'll use from now on, is to become ensnared. He felt something slip within him, as though from his grasp, and made a frantic scramble to regain his hold. It was the demon's child. He was losing it. He embraced the demon, full-hearted and with all his strength, and in that dreadful moment became the demon. The delicate strands of the deceiver's glamour wind through the assemblage in the great hall. Thorn cast himself toward the doorway of the great hall. Hands not hands slipped again, and Thorn hesitated, torn between two demands of equal weight. Elora's on the one hand, and the demon child's on the other. The doors begin to open. He knows as certainly as he knows anything that Elora is doomed if she steps inside that chamber. It was no choice, really. He cleaved himself child from demon, and then did the same again, to cast the demon from himself. He bent over the woman's body, his lips to hers, and let his spirit pass over to all the hollow places within her. Her lips moved beneath his. There were tears in his eyes, in hers. "It's all right," he tried to say. "You're all right, you're safe." But the words wouldn't come, because for all his efforts, he wasn't yet sure they were true. "Bastards!" he heard someone shout, and he turned to see Jaren Havelhand, double-handed broadsword shaking in his grasp. Face upturned to the palace above, Jaren cried, "Bastards! They're killing the lions!" He rushed down the stairs. "Cut 'em down like butchers, them and their damn birds!" "Oh, the herons!" "Drumheller, what's happening? What does it mean?" "Nothing good, I fear. Has anyone sounded the alarm?" "None left of ours to try. Only reason I'm still alive is I ran into the old keep. Oh, forgive me, Peck. I didn't know this is what they did with you. I thought they'd treat you better." "Make amends when you can, lad. Now's not the time. See to the lady here." The young Daikini flushed to the roots of his hair. "Blessed Elora, she's got no clothes." "Then find her some, and quickly. Horses, too. I have other responsibilities. Trust me in this, and be careful." "And you the same?" Jaren turned to the woman. "Got yourself a name, missy?" Thorn didn't expect a reply. "Corey," she said, her voice roughened by an age of unuse. "Corey Banafan." "Jaren Havelhand. A pleasure." "Demon!" Thorn made the word a summons.
You've done well, little mage. Speak to the stones. They will make way for you.
He reached out to the stones, requesting safe passage. As they answered him, he felt within them their response to the sound of another fanfare and the moon rise. Both moments made Elora tremble, and through the double bond that made Thorn part of both demon and castle, it was as though he stood by her side. The doors swing wide. Elora knows the face that waits on the dais, though her whole life has passed since she saw it last, and when his arms open wide to receive her, she remembers how warm and safe she always felt in his embrace. "Elora Dannon," she hears him say, "in the name of the 12 domains, I bid you welcome." A shallow ramp leads her around the circumference of the central dais, past each of the assembled domains. As she makes her circuit, she glances across the front rank of chairs. One section of seats is virtually empty. Only one figure, a boy, or possibly a girl, she can't really tell, sits alone, resplendent in an iridescent suit. He seems to her to fill the entire space, to the point where she has a sense of great wings folded over a sinuously majestic body that reaches all the way to the ceiling. "A shaper," she breathes. "By all the blessed, a dragon." Everyone else present, she notes, is joined by delicate strands of gold and glitter, which leap toward her as she passes each row in turn, only to fizzle as they come near her. The boy is also untouched. The apex of the domed roof is a skylight displaying the seals of the 12 domains, interwoven to form that of the fabled, long-hoped-for 13th, her domain. As the skylight catches and intensifies the moon glow, the room turns silver. This light has a weight, a presence that she doesn't like. It illuminates all the secret places within her, and it hurts. She thinks she says something, is sure she hears a voice that strangely resembles her own, but only Willow is speaking in the formality of phrase the ceremony demands. All is silver. She is silver, her figure stiffening within as her costume imprisons her without. Earlier in the ceremony, she'd thought herself a statue in all her layers of clothing. Now, she is becoming one in fact, and terror washes across her. "No," she says, not realizing she speaks aloud. That small, simple word casting a spear into the heart of the complex construct of power Willow is building about her. He doesn't believe his ears. He stumbles over the next phrase, has to repeat himself, and there's nothing friendly any longer in his eyes as he wills her to be silent. "No!" Streamers of silver fire swirl about the dais, cast down from the skylight to the floor, ringing her like the burning bars of a cage. "No!" she cries. She throws her hand forward, palm first, to bat away the flames. Mistake. Being of the moon, they cast a fire that is cold, but inflicts no less intense a burn. With a scream, Elora snatches her hand back and cradles it against her breast. Then she tucks her head and kicks forward through the flames. She has an awful sense of clothes burning, hair burning. And then she's clear. She plows into Willow and knocks him from his perch, and they tumble from the dais. "Selfish, headstrong, bloody little cow!" her godfather and protector squalls. He takes her by the front of her smoldering gown, about to pitch her back toward the flames. "You'll ruin everything!" "Why?" she sobs. "For a world that must never be.
The sacrifice of one for the salvation of all."
"You heard Elora Dannon, deceiver," says a new voice, seemingly from nowhere. "Leave her alone." To Elora, Thorn seemed to pop up from solid stone. He struck Willow behind the knee, and when the taller figure staggered, boxed both his ears to force him to release the girl, then heaved the deceiver into the conflagration. He went in. He didn't come out the other side. "Elora Dannon," Thorn said. I know you," she replied in some confusion. "I'm a friend. I'm here to help you."
Little knowing fool! You've done more harm than you can know!
The column of fire was gone, and with it all semblance of Willow Upgood's humanity. The face and the form hadn't changed in basic shape, but flame had taken the place of flesh, and Thorn thought that he'd come face to face with yet another demon.
And now you'll pay the price!
A bolt of withering flame struck, corroding stone to powder. It would have done the same to Thorn himself had he not dived aside and yanked Elora with him. He looked for the portal through which he'd arrived, but saw it sealed by the same attack. Thorn addressed the cheering crowd. "Elora is betrayed!"
A wasted effort, Peck. They see what they believe is Elora Ascendant. They no more hear you than the child. I am salvation, not her.
Despite himself, Thorn had to look, drawn by a force of command that was as irresistible an attraction as those which held the world together. The voice was water to a thirsty man, love to one who'd never known it before. Step by step, he made his way towards the embrace of oblivion, eyes only for the glory before him, as the deceiver of necessity had eyes only for him. Neither was aware of any other presence until Elora blindsided Thorn like a charging ram and sent the pair of them crashing off the dais to the feet of Kirin Denier. "You'd better go," said the child. "Things here, I suspect, are about to turn very nasty." He stood, catching the deceiver's next attack full in the chest, while his human guise peeled away before the burning onslaught. Kirin's flesh stretched high and wide, clawed forelimbs, gouging scars in the stone as his towering head brushed the ceiling. A single sweep of his wings could generate a wind capable of tearing full-grown oaks from the ground. What they thought was costume stood revealed as his magnificent, iridescent skin. Down every aisle came the Vizard's halberds leveled, and Thorn covered Elora's body with his own as the dragon struck out with head and tail and dashed a double score of figures aside, clearing a path for them to the main entrance. Unfortunately, the deceiver wasn't about to let them go that easily. Thorn heard a volley of words flung after them. Ice slapped Thorn in the face, the flames freezing every bit of moisture in the air and casting them in a hurricane vortex that made them as vicious as tiny blades. Elora screamed. Her eyes blazed with the same awful fire as the figure on the dais, her arms outstretched as her body was drawn up on tiptoe. Thorn knew at once what was happening. The deceiver had summoned the powers with his spell and was channeling them through Elora. Energy so raw and primal it burned his eyes to behold it, exploded from her. The deceiver's attacks turned to the dragon, who made no effort to deflect them as they ripped into him, each plunging deep as a spear. As fast as the deceiver poured his infernal energies into Elora, Kirin drew them into himself. The dragon's great head snapped forward, and honest scarlet flame leapt forth to counter the lunar cold. Now, at long last, it was the deceiver who was put on the defensive. For the briefest of moments, he was enveloped in the glare of the dragon's breath, but a lance of incandescence burned the air between the deceiver's outstretched arms and the dragon's breast, and a light burst within the huge creature. Then, almost all turned to silver. Kirin turned his gaze on the deceiver with a look as full of compassion as sorrow. Kirin Denier fell with a crash that shook the tower to its foundations. As the dragon collapsed, it took with it whatever remained of the power that had manifested through Elora, so she collapsed as well. Thorn had at best a few seconds to act. He settled Elora in his arms, placed his right hand on the flagstone floor, and spoke to the stones. Then he simply dove in, as though the stone were a pool of water. Hands caught them on either side. "Blessed bride," said Jeren. "Where'd you come from?" Thorn saw frost on every exhalation. His eyes followed the hand on his arm up to Corey's face. Jeren had been true to his word and had found her a decent set of clothes. "Why is it so cold?" he asked as they hurried along a passage. Corey tapped his arm and pointed. Elora's eyrie burned. The magical blaze extended down the column, and the flames wouldn't stop when they reached the bottom, Thorn knew. As within her hall, these eldritch flames didn't give off warmth. They absorbed it. Jeren had a quartet of Daikini war horses standing nervously at hand, more than ready to run. The main thoroughfares were blocked, so Jeren found them a roundabout route to the King's Gate. Thorn thought the streets would be thick with people fleeing the fire, but while they encountered a fair number, it was nowhere near what he'd expected. It was as if the whole city understood that it was doomed. The animals, however, were fleeing. Thorn saw cats and dogs, household pets, and beasts of burden, vermin of every description, horses, mules, sheep, and cattle. Thorn's small party found their first body just inside the gatehouse. Anakeri's Sergeant Major Jalabi had managed to draw his sword against his attackers, and had obviously given a fair account of himself. Thorn looked past Jalabi's sightless eyes, wishing there was a way to wipe the shame of failure that was the last image imprinted on the old soldier's soul. He heard the hiss of steel slicing air, and turned to see Corey wielding the man's sword as though it had been made for her. He took a lesser blade from the dead man's other hand. "With your blessing, old campaigner, I ask this boon. A chance to set things right," he said. Outside there was an eerie stillness at the gate, as countless eyes, none of them human, turned to Thorn in mute expectation. The animals scuttled to clear a path for him. "Drumheller!" called Corey from atop the wall, which made him stare in dumbfounded astonishment. How did she get herself all the way up there? "Riders from the land, coming fast!" Thorn slashed his blade across his palm, coating its edge with blood, then slapped the crossbar that locked the looming double doors of the gate. A link established between the three key elements, himself, the blade, the target. He marshaled his will, giving full vent to all his grief and fury. The sound of Thorn's voice echoed across the plaza, and the doors blew off their mountings. Beyond, the Mason riders were thrown by the titanic shockwave. Horses fled in panic. Only Anna Carey remained the mistress of her mount. But it did her no good, as the animals that thronged the inner plaza took full advantage of the way to freedom. Thorn and his companions were seen, but the Mason hadn't a prayer of stopping them. They simply couldn't be reached through that awesome stampede. "By the abyss," she heard Modri say. "It stopped," he said. "What?" "See for yourself, Highness. The flames reached the city walls and stopped. They've gone no further." She lifted herself on her stirrups. There were no more flames, yet everything before her glowed like ice and diamonds. "You should have left the peck to me," Modri said. "If you hadn't joined me for an inspection of my encampment beyond the walls." Anna Carey kept a firm grip on her emotions. She had lost everything, and both knew it. "3 horses," she said. 4 riders, 2 men, 2 women, 1 man in royal Angwin colors, 1 Nelwyn. I don't know the man. I don't know the woman. But before her, on her saddle, rode the one who called himself Drumheller. She carried Jalabi's sword. The girl was Alora Dannon. I want them, Modri." It was a crisp, clear night, and stars should have filled the sky. But only the brightest now could be seen from the crest of the ridge line, where the foursome had wearily dismounted. "Never seen any fire cast up such a shine," Jaren said. "Damnation, Peck, what the hell happened? Are they all dead in Angwin, d'you think?" "Anna Carey's free," Thorn noted, rolling her silver hair clip between his fingers. Jaren nodded. "Aye." "Who are you?" challenged a girl's voice, and the 2 men turned to the bedroll where Alora Dannon lay. She gleamed, like she'd just come from the jewelsmith. All the gold was gone from her hair as well. If anything, it had turned more pale than her skin. "You're safe with us, Elora." "I know you!" He smiled, thinking of the baby who used to burble happily when he held her. "You're the Peck who attacked me! Guards! Vizards!" "Oh, there's none about but us, girl," said Jaren, who hadn't yet twigged to her true identity. "I am no girl, wretch! I am the sacred Princess Elora Dannon." "Oh, bless my soul!" Jaren was on his knees before he finished speaking. "Don't you remember?" Thorn demanded of Elora. "You never told me, Peck. Stealing the sacred princess, are you mad?" "Your precious Ares gone, Elora," Thorn said with flat brutality. "And the king's city with it, and the rulers of the 12 domains." "Liar!" And she caught Thorn across the face with her fist. "You don't know me? From the tower. You and those 2 awful little—" Her mouth twisted in disgust. "Bug men." "The spell of assumption. Do you remember the flames? The creature who pretended to be Willow?" "You lie! Willow Offgood is my protector." "It's not surprising that you don't remember. The spell of assumption guts a person's soul. It burns from you all that you were, every memory, every aspect of self, leaving you a hollow and wholly empty vessel." She ignored him and turned to Jaren. "You! I want to go home. You take me." "Beg pardon, most serene highness, but I got to tell you, the horses can't handle that ride. Besides, the Peck's right. Angwin's cursed." I hate you both!" And with that, Elora collapsed on her bedroll in tears. The following morning, the escarpment was dusted with snow. Elora was still outraged, and Thorn could find no sign of the Pathfinder, only Corey, huddled snug under the ridgeline, where an umbrella of rock provided a sort of refuge. The thump of hooves, the jingle of a bridle, announced the Pathfinder's return. Turned out that was true, only not quite the way Thorn assumed. The young man's bound and battered body was pitched over the crest to skid downslope to Thorn's feet. A stranger rode his horse. A half-score of bravos lined the ridge, hefting weapons. "Fortune's made, boys," the rider announced. "We're all rich men, sure." The air inside the roadside alehouse where they were taken, bound and gagged, was thick with smoke and the stench of unwashed bodies. One of the bravos shoved Corey into a corner where she sank to a loose-limbed seat on the floor. Elora they gave a wide berth to. She, of course, was furious and told the men so in no uncertain terms. They turned out to be less patient than Thorn, slapping in place a leather mask that covered the whole of her head. A broad belt went around her waist, and she was shackled to a ring bolt on the wall. They hog-tied Jeren. As for Thorn, a neck collar was fastened to yet another ring bolt, and his hands were tied behind his back. He busied himself persuading his bonds they'd be much more fulfilled undone. "Maybe she's a magic," posed one of the men, tossing a thumb to where Elora sat in an awkward huddle. "Not just silver to look at, I'm saying, but the real thing through and through."
"So what if she is?"
asked another, burping the foam off his beer.
"Worth a lot more then, I'm thinking, than what's been offered."
"You're a daft bugger, Mallow,"
said the leader, whose name was Simya. Mallow was sidling glances towards Corey, not bothering to mask the thoughts behind them.
"If and I don't harm the bitch Simya, who's to object to me having a bit of fun with her, eh?"
Simya simply waved a hand in acquiescence. The Daikini swaggered the length of the bar to the cheers of his fellows, even Simya joining in by hauling Corey to her feet. Mallow put his lips on hers. It was a long kiss. Through it all, Corey reacted not a bit. Jeren's voice broke through the din. "Leave her be, damn ya!" One of the bravos minding him poked his broken ribs, and the Pathfinder twisted in agony. That was all the motivation Mallow needed. He gave Jeren a leer in return and hustled Corey past the bar to the cubicles beyond. But just as they were about to enter, she turned and took him in a splendid high kick in the bridge of the nose. He staggered backwards, blood spurting as if he'd been poleaxed. As he collapsed, she grabbed up a broad-headed mallet used to hammer spigots into beer barrels. The first man to follow caught a short jab to the head, the next a full-fledged swing that doubled him over. Thorn yanked his hands free the moment Corey made her move, tearing open the buckle of his collar and dropping flat to the floor as the nearest thug made a lunge for him. When the Daikini landed, Thorn clamped the collar around his neck, one down. He scooped some powder from his pouch and puffed it toward the men watching Jeren. Each tiny dust mote was instantly imbued with manic life and the combined properties of a burr and a very hot coal. By the time Thorn reached Jeren, the Daikini were hopping like madmen, slapping at itching little horrors they could barely see. Then the ceiling fell in, and Rin Taxamanyan crashed among them. The Wern landed beside Simya, and before the big man could react, scooped his legs out from under him and dropped him with force enough to shake the floor. Rin had claws, but he preferred knives, 3 in each hand, held between clenched and folded fingers, and used them with madcap abandon, never to draw blood. Thorn saw that from the start. Most of the wounds that followed came from one thug striking another by mistake. Thorn called Corey to help with Jeren and hurried to Elora, wincing as something hot flicked the back of his neck. At first he thought he'd run into one of his own mites, but a glance upwards told him the situation was far more serious. A torch had ignited the roof, and even though the outside air was damp with falling snow, the bulk of the thatch was tinder dry. He freed Elora from the wall and cast about for an exit. Rin popped up to point the way. They hustled out the door to the horses their Wern deliverer had brought, just as the lodgepole collapsed, pulling the bulk of a wall along with it. They were well into the trees, along a trail used mostly by woodland creatures, when Rin pulled Alora's gag free. Her eyes went wide at Rin's furry face as he placed a hand over her face to silence her, a finger on his lips. Thorn expected a tantrum, but she surprised him with a twitch at the corner of her mouth that might have been the beginnings of a legitimate smile, an expression he'd seen before when a fairy had danced on the baby Alora's nose. So, he thought, the world's still a wonder to you, child. Might be some hope for you yet. I'm a friend, Rin told Elora, looking her straight in the eyes, although his words were for them all. And we're thankful for it, Thorn replied. I know you from the riverboat, exclaimed Jeren to Rin as they rode through the night. The Wern nodded and answered Thorn's unspoken query. Morag put me ashore, had a dream, cast a looker to see what's what. A looker was a prescient trance. They made fair time. Rin had a knack for finding the easiest, quickest pathways through the forest, but that didn't always mean he'd follow them. If a trail was natural to him, it could be the same for any in pursuit. Finally, he found them a place to rest just within the tree line, and Thorn was able to gentle Jeren's broken ribs back into place. But there was no time for the Pathfinder or anyone else to recoup their lost strength, for Thorn felt a trembling to the ground. A puff of his powder made a tiny puddle before him into a scrying pool, a window through which inside could show him virtually any place in the realms. The sight made him gasp aloud. Rin, Morag's waiting to pick you up again? Yes, why? The Thunder Riders are coming from the south. Not just men and hounds, seekers from the Vale folk. If we stay on land, we're done. The wind on the bay side of the peninsula's central spine was cold and hard, as though it came straight off an ice cap. Only a fool sets sail in weather like this when she don't have to, Morag grumbled. Believe me, if there was an alternative. Thorn's eyes turned north, as though he could see through the lowering cloud base and perhaps even the glow of cursed Angwin. Morag's mate and husband Shando called, Hatches triple battened, Morag. We're as ready as we'll ever be. I offer no guarantees, Drumheller. Not on a day like this, with storms blowing out of nowheres, Morag said. A swell pushed the ship clear of shore, and they were off. Following the others in his party, Thorn was on the steps to the cabin below when the ship fully cleared the breakwater, and they got their first taste of what lay beyond. The swells began to strike the hull like solid objects, shaking the schooner along its whole length. In the cabin, Elora and Jeren sat together, the Pathfinder doing his best to shield her, Elora shivering and sobbing. They were all bitterly cold. Morag came down the hatchway. You! She jabbed a thumb at Rin, then at Corey. Time you made yourselves useful. Clear the bilge as hard as you can. Drumheller, on deck. The wind lashed at him with such force that he could only moderate its effect on himself. There was no way to spare the others or the boat. Morag put her lips to his ear and bellowed, Can you help? It's the wind and sea! Natural forces! Nothing magical! What I feared! Can't cut across the face of the storm! Our only hope's to run before it! That would take them back the way they'd come, towards Angwin. Shando pointed from the wheel. See there! The glow! Too big for a lighthouse! Angwin, I'm thinking, Drumheller, said Morag. We don't want to go there! The buildings were ablaze still, glowing silver from within. Ice had been spun into gossamer spiderwebs that linked every structure, and, Thorn suspected, every being within the city walls, transforming the metropolis into a confection so delicate the slightest tap with a hammer would shatter it to dust. Rin's head popped up the companionway steps. Drumheller! Elora Dunnan is gone! There! Shando pointed to a figure clambering awkwardly up the forward companionway, making her way around the foremast until she was in front, with her back plastered to it.
Bleeding bloody hell!
Morag snarled as Rin levered himself into view and plunged recklessly toward Alora. I am the sacred Princess Alora Dannon, the child called against the gale. It is my destiny to rule the 13 realms. It is your duty to obey. Wind and waves, hear me. I command you to be still. She was hardly wider than the mast itself, a scarecrow in tattered finery, yet she called the storm to silence, and for that first wondrous moment, Thorn thought that, by sheer gall, she had pulled it off. Suddenly, the scene was gripped by an active silence. They reached the crest of the wave, and the mystery was broken by a hollow wail from Shando.
Oh my God!
The moment was frozen, as though the world itself had been crystallized like anger. They crested the wave, a higher, steeper climb than any previous, only this time there was no slope to negotiate on the far side. Instead, a sheer drop, as though they'd come to the edge of a cliff.
Hold on!
Thorn heard Morag cry just before they struck. He grabbed for the nearest handhold as the deck tilted vertical, saw water on every side as the bow plunged into the trough. Arms gathered about him, Morag using her body to shield his as best she could. The mainmast snapped like a twig, wrapping the hull in a tangle of massive splinters, tearing sails and cordage. In another instant, they were underwater, the world still rolling all about him as the riptides within the wave tried to yank him free. He felt Morag slip, lunged for her, but couldn't find any decent purchase. She was hurled against the aft companionway like a broken rag doll, then dropped into the cabin. Hatches and portholes gave way under the tremendous impact, water bursting into the cabin, solid wood visibly flexing like sheets of tin. He didn't know how he survived, knew even less how the ship managed, but that was what happened. We're alive, he said aloud. It was Jaren who found Morag. The men had to hurt her, bringing her onto the deck. She was broken in too many places for them not to, but she didn't make a sound. My wife needs you, wizard, Shando said. Thorn wiped her face clear of blood, feeling the crack to the skull just beyond her hairline. She spoke with a pinch of her normal asperity. Where away are we? He could feel Angwin's infernal chill burning into his back. Ahead, beyond the next wave, was the breakwater that formed a barrier to the great bay. Due off the headland. The main current stays without. The wind pushes us in, Morag said. We have to stay with the current. He saw what had to be done and shook his head. There must be another way. The schooner won't hold together. What, Thorn? She muttered impatiently. Can I save my boat and save me? You wee damn daft bugger. If you don't save the boat, there's no point what you try with me. The danger was that Thorn's display of power would mark their position as surely as any beacon, but the risk had to be taken. He cast ahead for the course that would carry them past Angwin. Doing well, little wizard, Morag said. He started to offer some of his strength to her, telling himself it wasn't too late. No, you have precious little strength left, none at all to spare for me. We have a problem. Rin, his fur plastered to his skin, came up to him, leading Alora on a tether. The child was apparently unhurt, but her face slack with shock. I think we're taking in water. The bow isn't coming up as high as before. No more subtleties, then, Thorn said. I'll push us to the shallows as fast as I can. He took a last sight of where they wanted to go, then reeled in shock as Morag grasped his hand, and a charge of energy swept through him as she cast over the last of her life. His eyes burned with tears, but he clenched his fist and threw his rage into the storm. Now they had a goal, and as the helmsman played with his wheel to keep them from being overmastered, so too did Thorn shape each wave in turn, smoothing the best slope for ascent and recovery. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. It was magical. It didn't last. Thorn felt a surge of energy up the length of his back. Then, doom was upon them all. It was a spell of dissolution, a physical assault designed to reduce them all to their component atoms. The image came to him of an infinite number of fishhooks sunk deep into every particle of his being. He countered by wrapping everybody in swaddling cloth that snugged them back together while also muting the worst of the pain. He wanted to protect Morag as well, but there wasn't enough of him to stretch that far, not if he was to do a proper job of protecting the living. Her flesh spiked outwards, and Shando wailed with grief and rage at this desecration of his wife's body. Thorn felt something hard in his hand, realized without looking that he held an acorn taken from his pouch. Couldn't help a smile of remembrance as he recognized the High Aldwin's gift to him when he left on that first fateful adventure. He charged the seed with power and tossed it to strike Morag where her heart had been. In that twinkling contact, she was transformed. Flesh became stone, and down she went beneath the surface. Now the same force that attacked them turned on their vessel. Nails flew from planks, and then the wood itself tore, one piece from the next, as the glue that bound them, and the enchantments and blessings that reinforced the physical connections were torn asunder.